ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So as we continue discussing the book Tarjeeh, Nukhbatul Fikr, and the original book by Ibn Hajar Al-Asqalani rahimahullah ta'ala, and this book it covers concerning usul al-hadith, what is referred to as Mustalah al-hadith. So we have been discussing regarding what the author here he mentioned regarding of those matters regarding hadith al-maqbul. So hadith that are said to be maqbul bi'tibar al-amal bihi wa adami. So at times the hadith that is said to be maqbul, sahih, or hadith al-hasan, that they are acting upon, and that's in most cases. But at times you might find a hadith which is maqbul, authentic, by way of it have passed the category concerned it has passed what is said to be authentic, but for a reason it is not acted upon or used. So he mentioned regarding concerning the ulama mentioned regarding hadith maqbul, minha, I would say the majority, yu'mal bih, that in most cases those hadith are acted upon and that they're used, but at times they may not. So they mentioned that sort of reason does occur regarding hadith as-sahih. So as we mentioned with ulama, that look at hadith by way of the isnad and also by way of the next matter to look at regarding al-matan. So not al-sanad wal-matan. So how to critique both the sanad of the hadith, the chain, the isnad, and also critiquing next the matan, the text of the hadith, the wording of the hadith. So on this matter, you find these cases arise where the ulama mentioned regarding also at times hadith may ta'arud. So you have maybe a ta'arud between hadith and how we are to unify between those hadith. So how to unify between those hadith. This is of those things that are covered by the ulama. So in this matter, the ulama mentioned that in those cases of ta'arud, how to harmonize between those hadith, that the first step, so I mentioned that there are certain steps to be taken. The first step, we'll find hadith that seems to be conflicting, opposing each other. What's the first step? The first step is to verify the authenticity of the hadith. Is all those hadith, are they authentic or not? If they're all authentic, but they're still opposing each other from what seems apparent, then the next step that the ulama applies will be al-khutwatu thani, al-jam bayna hadithain. So how to unify between those two hadith. So how to harmonize between those hadith. So on this matter regarding al-jam bayna hadith, that ulama, that they have their maslak or ways of how to go about doing so, but the person will try to take off this. So the next path is to take off this. And you find this regarding al-jam bayna hadith, that you might find occur in the books of the fuqaha, in the books of fiqh, where hadith seem to be conflict regarding a hukum and how they try to harmonize between those rulings. So that's you find that, and also in the books of shuruhat al-hadith, books that explain hadith, also you find that they apply this method in those books. If not able to al-jam, to unify between the hadith or to harmonize between the hadith, then the next mas'ala the ulama mention, An-Nasikh. They mention the next of the step would be the third step would be An-Nasikh. So our concern, so An-Nasikh, after al-jam, we're to see concerning which of those hadith, two hadith, that they seem to be conflicting with each other, but in this case one is nullifying the ruling of the other or abrogating the ruling of another. So one was applied at a certain time, then that stopped and it was replaced by a new ruling. So that's concerning An-Nasikh. That is An-Nasikh, one thing applied at a certain time, but then that was replaced with another ruling that abrogated it. And we'll discuss that first. That will be the discussion of what is this session today will be about An-Nasikh because of its importance. Then I mentioned the third of those method, al-khutwa al-thalitha, at-tarjeeh. So making a tarjeeh, where a person, because of the person may take to one of those ruling over another based upon qara'in. So based upon thing which is of the qara'in, so you have other matters that the person will use to decide as to which of those to take. So you have those two hadith, but he has to accept one and dismiss the other. So how does he go about doing so? Making a tarjeeh. So tarjeeh between two matters but you have to give precedence to one over the other. So what's the method of doing so? As I mentioned, the ulama of hadith, so you have the ulama of usul have their rules in place regarding at-tarjeeh, and also the ulama of hadith also have certain system in place regarding at-tarjeeh. So for ulama, they may look at one hadith which is a more authentic hadith. So look at the hadith that seem to be opposing each other, and they may say at at-tarjeeh that this hadith is more authentic, so we'll give it to precedent over the one which is maybe of less authenticity. So of those things that are applied at times regarding at-tarjeeh. Also, of the next step that they mention, that will be the next step after tarjeeh, if not possible, at-Tawaquf. So the person, Tawaquf, that a person, he doesn't hold to a position. Tawaquf. So he doesn't take to a position, still waiting to come to a conclusion, but at the moment, he hasn't per se come to a final conclusion as to which of those ruling to take. So those are the khutawat that ulama mentioned regarding in case of ta'arud. So today, inshallah ta'ala, we'll more focus of these ways regarding the matter regarding An-Nasikh. So we'll be more discussing of this path that ulama have mentioned regarding this. So An-Nasikh, as the ulama have mentioned, so An-Nasikh lughatan, so we discuss regarding what is meant by this lughatan. The ulama mentioned that lughatan, linguistically, it means ar-raf wal-izala. And some mention an-naql. So of those mentioned regarding ar-raf, so something to be raised, or izala, something to be replaced. So another meaning that it carries, another meaning also, and also, so these are the meaning that it carries. Or two, so the meaning that for us is the meaning which is istilahan, has been now taken amongst the ulama. And this discussion regarding An-Nasikh, and also as they refer to as Nasikh wal-Mansukh. So in the bab of the ulama, they mention Nasikh wal-Mansukh, things that have been the abrogator and the abrogation. So abrogation of things, you have the Nasikh, the one that abrogate, and the one that have been abrogated. So the one that is doing the abrogation, the Nasikh, and the one that it falls upon is the Mansukh, that ruling now it is removed. So An-Nasikh, this practice is called An-Nasikh. The ulama mention Raf al-Hukum Dalil al-Shar'i or Lafzi. So it's those replacing, lifting a ruling, a Sharia ruling with Dalil or certain wordings, bidalil, with another evidence, mutaakhir min kitab wa sunnah, or being replaced by something that came after, that is found in the book or in the sunnah. So that's concerning An-Nasikh. So something, ruling being removed from removed by a text from the Quran and the Sunnah, or something being abrogated by that which came after. So that's concerning that matter regarding An-Nasikh. So something been established by way of the Sharia, that is the practice, but then later on, after, something else came that may replace that ruling, lift that ruling is not then applied. So that's concerning what is meant by An-Nasikh. Then ulama, they discuss regarding, and of the two parts, we have the Nasikh and the Mansukh. We have the Nasikh and the Mansukh. So on this matter, the ulama have mentioned regarding concerning, so linguistics also mean naqla shay. So An-Nasikh mean naqla shay. As I mentioned regarding that, nasakhtu al-kitab, mean that, I wrote that book, what was written from, I take something, write something exactly from one book to another. So that's concerning An-Nasikh. But overall regarding a hukum al-thabit, so something that has been established by the Sharia, that it was older, that have been replaced that by something by the Sharia that came after. So I mentioned that Al-Mansukh was the old ruling, and the Nasikh is the newer ruling. So the Mansukh is the older ruling, and the Nasikh is the more recent ruling, and that's the one that is to be applied. So the Nasikh is the one to be applied, and the Mansukh, the one that has been abrogated, is not to be applied. The ulama mentioned next, the ulama discussed concerning amniyat of this discussion, that that some of the ulama mentioned regarding the importance of Imam Shafi rahimahullah ta'ala, Imam Shafi rahimahullah ta'ala, that placed emphasis on this matter, to the extent where they mentioned that it is stated, and Ahmad bin Hanbal rahimahullah ta'ala قال كتبت كتب شافي فقال لا قال فرأته. So Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala saying to someone that called Muslim ibn Muhammad ibn Muslim, that he's saying to this person, they wrote books of Shafi, said no. Then I mentioned فرأته, then you have missed out. قال ما علمنا مجمل من المفسر, that we did not know of the thing which is the general stuff and the thing that give more clarity. ولا ناسخ حديث رسول الله sallam من منسوخ, that we did not know those hadith, what is the abrogated hadith from the Prophet Islam, حتى جالسنا الشافعي, until we sat with Imam Shafi. So Imam Shafi rahimahullah ta'ala, he placed emphasis on these matters. So I show that the ulama that place emphasis on this matter, so one should give this attention, one should give this matter attention, especially regarding passing of ruling. So they mentioned regarding concerning the alim, regarding a muhaddith and a faqih, that they should, and also even more so a faqih, that he has to be aware of these things regarding those things that are said to be the bab of Nasikh or Mansukh, things that have been abrogated, so as not to apply things when they are not to be applied, and not accept that which is to be accepted regarding what came later. After the ulama discuss regarding how the person identify this, so they mentioned regarding concerning that كيف يعرف or كيف وقوف على النسخ. Our person then now determine that something has been abrogated. How we determine something has been abrogated. So how we come to that decision. So طرق معرفة النسخ, or what are the ways to identify that something has been abrogated. One of those methods I mentioned, تصريح بوقوع النسخ من نبي الإسلام, that the Prophet Islam is the one who actually said this. So the Prophet Islam is the one who have actually stated this in the hadith. So the Prophet Islam, so what it means, an example of that, the Prophet Islam mentioned hadith, نهيتكم عن زيارة القبور فزوروها. For نهيتكم, that he mentioned, and other things that he mentioned regarding concerning other matters, but I think the Prophet mentioned that نهيتكم عن زيارة القبور, at that point I have forbid you from visiting the grave, but now you can do so. So before it was forbidden of visiting of the graveyards and grave sites, but then later on the Prophet Islam himself, that he abrogated that ruling and replaced with a new ruling, which is now you're allowed. So before there was no allowance, but now there's permission. So that's concerning of those matters. And also other things that, so the Prophet Islam at times in being the one stating such matters. Another way of a person determining that something has been naskh, been abrogated, تصريح الصحابة بآخر أمرين, that a Sahaba mentioning the last of those matters was the final judgment. So a Sahaba may be the one that give us that understanding that this is the final judgment on this matter. So you find of cases regarding of these matters. Where the Prophet mentioned regarding concerning that in the hadith of Ubay ibn Ka'b anhu, where he mentioned أن الفتية التي كانوا يفتون, that the futya that they used to pass, mean concerning the Sahaba, أن الماء من الماء, that water is from water. They mentioned that water is from water. وكانت رخصة كان رخصة رخصها رسول الله عليه السلام في بدء الإسلام, in the early days of Islam. So it was water from water. There was a person that have any semen discharge, then he has to perform ghusl. So any semen discharge, the person have to perform ghusl. Then it mentioned that then becomes a rukhsah, the Prophet Islam, that he gave that was the early stage of Islam. Then he mentioned ثم أمر بالاغتسال بعد. Then he mentioned that the person that he has to perform ghusl after. So the Prophet Islam mentioned that the early days it was one practice, and then later on that it became something else. So water, the person that for early days that one could get away with doing wudu. Or I mentioned also another hadith. I mentioned كان آخر أمرين من رسول الله السلام ترك الوضوء مما غيرت النار. So the Prophet mentioned that also. This is the Jabir mentioned that of the last of those things the Prophet did was after eating that, not performing wudu after eating things that were fried. So at one point, if things that were fried, then the Prophet, or roasted, the Prophet he would perform wudu, but then later on he didn't do so. So that's concerning of those matters. So that's from the Sahaba making us know of that matter. Sahaba, and I mentioned that so the Sahaba making us know of that matter. The third of those ways identifying these things, they mention معرفة المتقدم والمتأخر من حديثين زمنا. So the next thing, the person knowing which of those hadith by way of time frame, which came later, which was the first, which the hadith was mentioned first, and then which hadith came after those ones. So that means that the person has to know concerning the time frame as to which is the first set of hadith and which one came after. So that's concerning of the person knowing of those things. The person has to know tarikhiyah by way of the time frame, exactly which one came after, which one was first and which one came after. So knowing of those things, so knowing of the time frame involved. And I mentioned cases of these regarding concern a distinction based upon a time frame that was used, but the person have to affirm that this one was first and this one came after. In the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, of the hadith of Shidad ibn Aus وغيره من حديث شداد بن عوس وغيره أن رسول الله عليه السلام قال أفطر الحاجم والمحجوم. The Prophet mentioned hadith that the one who does cupping and the one who does the cupping and the one who's performed upon that after that their siyam is broken. So the one who does the act and the one who's performed upon them, that their wudu is invalidated from cupping. So that's the hadith that on that topic, that hadith in Abu Dawud, Ibn Majah, and Shaykh Al-Albani rahimahullah ta'ala, who all the hadith to be sahih. In brief, then I mention another hadith, the hadith of Ibn Abbas. So you have a hadith of Ibn Abbas, ta'ala anhuma, قال النبي السلام احتجم وهو محرم. The Prophet Islam, Ibn Abbas mentioned the Prophet Islam, he performed hijama, cupping, وهو محرم, and he was in a state of ihram. So they mentioned that the Prophet Islam, so he mentioned regarding, and they mentioned واتجم وهو صائم, and also he mentioned واتجم وهو صائم, and also he mentioned hadith that he performed hijama wa صائم. So the first hadith, it mentioned that if one does cupping, this nullifies one siyam. And the second hadith mention of Ibn Abbas, that the Prophet Islam, he did so of cupping, وَهُوَ صَائِمٌ, and he was fasting. So which take precedent? They mentioned the time frame that hadith of Ibn Abbas, the Prophet Islam, وَهُوَ muhrim, showed that the Prophet was performing Hajj, and that was in the last year. So, and the hadith before, the hadith of Aus, they mentioned that hadith that it occurred before that hadith. The hadith of Shadad, they mentioned it occurred Amul Fat, في سنة الثانية or ثامنة. So the hadith of Shadad ibn Aus, it occurred in the 8th year of the Hijrah, سنة الثامنة al-Hijrah. And the hadith of Ibn Abbas, it occurs later on in Hajjatul Wada, and that occur in the 10th year of the Hijrah. So they know the time frame accurately, can put a time frame to both. So based upon this, it shows that the one that came after, that it is the one that is to be acted upon, and the one before is not to be acted upon. So that's concerning Bab An-Nasikh wal-Mansukh as an example. Of other things they mention al-Ijma, not per se Ijma is the evidence, but also it shows that this one is to be given precedent. This one is to be given precedent. It mentioned the Hadith, إِذَا سَكَّرَ فَجْلِدُوا. If a person is drunk, then he is to be whipped. ثُمَّ إِن سَكَّرَ فَجْلِدُوا. And a second time, if he drinks, he is to be whipped. ثُمَّ إِن سَكَّرَ فَجْلِدُوا. And a third time, if he drinks, he is to be punished with whipping. فَإِنْ عَادَ الرَّابِعَ. And if he repeats it for the fourth time, فَاقْتُلُوا. Then he is to be killed. He is to be killed. And it is mentioned by At-Tirmidhi, the ulama mentioned that that this hadith, amongst them At-Tirmidhi rahimahullah, that hadith is not acted upon. So that hadith, even though it is there authentic, but ijma, by way of the ulama, not acting according to the hadith. So it seems the hadith, according to what is mentioned by some of the ulama, so ijma is not itself can abrogate the hadith, but it's an indicator. It's an indicator of the hadith not being applied, or tark al-amal bihi. So those are the ways that ulama have mentioned regarding this. So the first three are the main ones: as-sari' an-nas, by the Prophet of Islam. Second, qawl sahabi, and the third is knowing the time frame of each, which is first and which came after. So those are the methods they mentioned regarding An-Nasikh. Of An-Nasikh, also of those points they mentioned regarding applying An-Nasikh to hadith, that it occurs regarding ahkamu shar'iyyah. As for matters regarding aqaid, no. Things of the unseen, no. So these hadith of Nasikh and Mansukh, things of abrogation, doesn't apply to matters of aqidah. It does not apply, but apply regarding ahkam al-shar'iyyah al-fiqhiyah, in that area of things of fiqh. As for things of regarding akadiyah, regarding wujub billahi subhanahu wa ta'ala, wa subhanahu to the sifat, then no, it does not apply. So the thing that also of the condition that the thing that is abrogating must be a text, authentic text. I would say in this case hadith, so that hadith must also be authentic, that is abrogating the former. And also غير مقيد, or time the hadith may be مقيد or mufassir, then no. So that's concerned of those things that one has to take into account regarding these ahkam. So as we have mentioned regarding concerning that the method of regarding hadith ta'arud, al-jam, thumma an-nasikh, thumma at-tarjeeh, thumma tawaquf, that's the path taken by the ulama. The next and the final of the things regarding hadith, an-nasikh wal-mansukh, books written in this field. So books written in this on this topic, more so regarding, so in this field you'll find that Bab An-Nasikh wal-Mansukh, a matter which is covered regarding Al-Quran and also by way of Hadith. So you find the books that Nasikh wal-Mansukh regarding Al-Quran wal Hadith together, and in some cases the Quran. So this apply in those two science, and most of the cases regarding Hadith. They mention here regarding concerning An-Nasikh wal-Mansukh of those who have written on this topic. So you find of the ulama who have written on this topic that we have the book which is they mentioned here, Nasikh wal-Mansukh by Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. So Nasikh wal-Mansukh by Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. They mentioned others who have written on this topic, that they have mentioned others, but of those that Ahmad ibn Hanbal, who died 241 al-Hijri, so 241 al-Hijri. Also of those who have written on this topic, Nasikh wal-Mansukh li-Athram, so Athram, who Abu Bakr al-Athram, who died 273, of a book, Nasikh al-Hadith wa Mansukh. Also An-Nasikh wal-Mansukh by, they mention Abu Dawood al-Sijistani, Sahibu Sunnah, who died 275. Also Nasikh wal-Mansukh by Abu Hafs Amr ibn Ahmed ibn Shaheen, who died 385. And that one is in print. Also, Al-Ihtibar fi Nasikh wal-Mansukh. Al-Ihtibar fi Nasikh wal-Mansukh. And that written by Abi Bakr Muhammad ibn Musa al-Hazimi. So the book of al-Hazimi, which is Al-Ihtibar fi Nasikh wal-Mansukh, that's considered to be the Awsa, one of a very important book on this topic. That's considered to be a important, useful book on this particular topic. Also, we have others who have written on this topic. That إعلام العالم بعد رسوخه بناسك الحديث ومنسوخه, and that is written by Abi Faraj ibn al-Jawzi. So Ibn Jawzi, who is Abu Faraj Abdul Rahman ibn Ali ibn Muhammad ibn Jawzi, who died 597. 597. As for Al-Hazimi, that he died 584. He died 584 Al-Hijri. So these are the ulama who have written on this topic. So these are a book, and also you have others who have written on this topic. So important that a person can somewhat acquaint themselves with some of these books and try to benefit from these books. And also you have Al-Rusukh Al-Akhbar fi Mansukh Al-Akhbar. Rusukh Ahbar fi Mansukh Al-Akhbar, and that's written by Ja'buri. So mentioned by Ja'buri, who have written on this book, and also that's not a very beneficial work on this topic. So you find that the ulama have written regarding this particular topic, that and also so you find the ulama of hadith written on this topic, and also you find that the ulama of the fuqaha and that also have written and also give attention to this type of work. So these are some of the works on that topic that the talib al-hadith and if the person of fiqh should have some book on this topic. But also those matters can be found or mentioned in the books of fiqh. At times may point out those things, and also at times they are pointed out by books in that in the ulama of the books that explain hadith also might point out those things, where at times they used to do of a certain practice, and then later on that change. So later on that change. So you find regarding concerning that in Siyam it goes through different stages. Salat went through different stages. So of certain ahkam of Islam, things that used to be done, then eventually they were changed. So the person being aware of those things so as to put everything in their proper order. So the person acted upon something which is mansukh, something which is abrogated and not to be done, was done one point, but then was removed. So the person going through the books of this nature will assist them regarding knowing of what applies to the bab of Nasikh wal Mansukh and applying things in their proper order and place. So the ulama as is mentioned by the ulama regarding concerning an Ali ibn Abi Talib قال من لا يعرف الناسك والمنسوخ أهلكت وأهلكت, that you have destroyed yourself and destroy others. So it shows regarding that's not important to the person that they are aware of these things, as the idea is to know that initially in Islam that there are things regarding ahkam shar'iyah used to be done in a particular way, but later on those things changed. So act upon what was the final judgment. How we know of those things, either Prophet ﷺ, the hadith himself will mention, or second, a sahabi stating to us that's the case, and it's authentic upon him. And the third is knowing the tarikh, knowing concerning the time frame of these hadiths, which came first and which came later, and applying the latter one, and that becomes the ruling to be followed. So this is the important. And also we mentioned that the ulama have written books on this topic, so a person being aware of those books and also going through those books to know of under what cases these applies. With this, inshallah ta'ala, we'll end this session today, inshallah ta'ala, and in the upcoming session we'll be discussing concerning matters regarding the author here discuss concerning, as I mentioned, Qism al-Thani. He'll be discussing also Qism al-Awwal regarding hadith sahih and what relates to hadith sahih regarding being able to can identify what's the criteria or what is the condition, shurut hadith sahih, after knowing what is said to be the definition of hadith sahih, and also different category of hadith sahih, what also is included, hadith al-hasan, so also the different, and then also a hadith by way of the sanad. Then also he discussed concerning matters regarding hadith that may have some weakness in some of the wording that are referred to as shadh, wal munkar, these type of hadith that one has to be aware of, where the narrator seems thiqat, the narrators are thiqat, but they may have some made errors, so one to be mindful of this. And also he discussed regarding also hadith is judged and looked at and critiqued by way of the mutun, and we discussed when it have ta'arud, hadith al-muhkam wa hadith mukhtalif al-hadith, and the likes that we have been discussing. And also we have covered regarding hadith An-Nasikh and Al-Mansukh, that these cases ta'arud, how we unify between those hadith, or how we come to a final conclusion. It requires concerning the person being aware of the path taken by the ulama of hadith and the ulama of Islam. So that inshallah ta'ala will end this session regarding discussing this final discussion regarding hadith al-maqbul and some of the masail that relates to it. And Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, according to the book of our books, is the pattern of the book, he'll discuss concerning hadith matter regarding al-mardud, hadith that are said to be mardud or / hadith da'if. So hadith are rejected or hadith da'if. What are the what relates to that discussion, that to come in the coming session. وبالله تعالى توفيق وهذه السبيل والآخرة والحمد لله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. How long was that?